Well, this sucks. Roll the intro. Hello everybody and welcome to the Aggieville Alleycats podcast, where come rain, shine, or anything in between, we're here to deliver to you the Kansas State sporting news that you so love. I'm Ace Edwards, right alongside
Connor Belfort.
And welcome to one of two episodes dropping today. This one probably dropping, I don't know why I'm going to say this one's dropping first, they're going to drop at the same time. But if you're listening to this one and you would prefer brighter news and happier, more reasonable, I'm not going to say more reasonable, but happier Connor and Ace, you can skip this one. Just go straight to the weekly recap. But yesterday, December 6th, the day that will live on in infamy, a lot of things happened. Colin Klein took the Texas A&M job as offensive coordinator, and yet somehow that was the least troubling thing to transpire yesterday. The most troubling thing was the day that I don't even think you and I feared it. I think you and I never thought that it would get to this point. But Naquan Tomlin has been dismissed from the basketball team. And before we get into, we're capping this episode at 30 minutes. This is 30 minutes of venting about both Colin Klein and the Naquan situation. So, Connor, what do you think, just top-down thoughts about the dismissal?
Well, it's definitely not something that I anticipated happening or unfolding so quickly. At least at the time. It's not shocking in hindsight that the second there was any public pressure for there to be a move made, that something did happen. Because I think that maybe it's a coincidence. It's probably not, but maybe it is, that the second that people really started to kind of get at the university for the whole situation, then something happened. Which, it's better that something happened than to just remain in limbo for all eternity, I suppose. Which I imagine is probably some of why the information got out when it did, was just to get a resolution. But the whole thing is, I think, a major black eye on the university and athletics. I can't remember in my lifetime such a massive misstep in coordination and messaging by the university. I genuinely cannot believe the level of incompetence that's been seen at all levels of administration from this whole situation, because it just seems like nobody was talking to each other this entire time. And if they were, it certainly didn't come off that way. And the anger's all directed at President Linton right now. I think that's the right person for most of it. But there's, I think, plenty of blame to go around to other parties. Like, I don't think this is just a President Linton thing, although I think the final choice was just him, at least from what you can tell. But beyond that, I think there were significant failings at other levels of K-State as well, with this whole situation. And just really, it's disappointing just how poorly everything was handled from start to finish.
Yeah, I think that's probably the word that I'm walking away with this most from, is just disappointment. Especially in, I know you said that it isn't all Richard Linton, but I'm of the opinion that we will never know the entire story about the whole Naquan Tomlin situation. You and I will never know, and it's very unlikely that anyone outside of the administration and Naquan Tomlin and the coaches will know. That being said, I understand why people are willing to point the finger at Richard Linton. And the reason why is because this is public knowledge now. It's gotten out on Twitter, so I feel comfortable at least saying it. Gene Taylor and Jerome Tang were both completely ready to let Naquan back onto the team after the diversion. The only person who seemingly was not okay with that idea was Richard Linton. And, for whatever reason he has, it could be a perfectly legitimate reason. It could be a perfectly good reason. It could be a silly reason. But to me, what matters is that it's a massive overstep of his authority. I know that he's the university president, and his job, first and foremost, is to think of the university and the university on the whole. K-State is not K-State athletics. K-State University is Kansas State University, top to bottom. That includes athletics, it includes public media perception, and it includes athletics. So, yes, Richard Linton should have a say in this matter. That being said, I think that going over the athletic director's head and going over the head coach of the team's head, and then having this may be a conspiracy theory, but I don't think it is at this point. There's no way that the statement that came out from the athletic department about Naquan Tomlin was written by Gene Taylor. I think Richard Linton was looking for the easy way out to say it and made Gene sign his name to it. Because I don't think that if everything we know is true, which, again, everything we could know is wrong, it could be that everything we know is wrong, like the Weird Al song. But there's no way that that is a statement from Gene, and I think Richard Linton sent out that statement, signed off by Gene Taylor, or made Gene sign off on it, so that he could cover his back. And I understand why you do it. That doesn't make me hate the behavior any less.
Yeah, I do agree. I really hate trotting out Gene Taylor's name, although I think it's pretty obvious Gene had nothing to do with the statement itself. Trotting out his name and hiding behind it, when it's pretty clear who was the person that was ultimately behind it. I mean, if you're going to make the unpopular choice, that's one thing, but you should at the very least stand behind the choice and be able to be the one to deliver the message. And it was pretty disappointing display of leadership, despite it being a decision that was widely disagreed with, which is a whole separate issue. But if you're going to make the unpopular choice, you have to be the one to stand behind it. You can't delegate that. That's the only possible way to make the optics worse in that situation, is to make the unpopular choice and then run away when it's time to deliver the message. That was one of the most shocking parts of the entire thing to me, was that he didn't really stand behind the choice, at least not publicly. But yeah, this whole situation is really weird, and you said this earlier, and I agree, at least right now, that it seems like we're never going to know the truth. Because, I mean, if you are on K-State Twitter, if you're on the message boards, you've seen probably like 30 different versions of the story. Everyone and their aunt seems to have a different version of the story that they've heard from someone who knew somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody. And I'm at the point where I genuinely don't believe anything. Like, all I know is that something happened. The one thing that's really caught my eyes a few times on Twitter, I have seen people say that one of the main reasons for the whole suspension was something that happened over the summer, as opposed to the more recent incident, although that's the one that's been getting the most traction, the incident at Tubby's everybody knows about. We can
Don't go to Tubby's, by the way.
Yeah, nothing good ever happened there. But we can verify something happened there. We just don't know what, and likely won't ever. But it's just a really weird situation all around, because you have the statement which says that there were NCAA violations that prevented him from coming back, even though the athletic director and Coach Tang were both okay with it. And now that Naquan is dismissed from the team, he'll graduate at semester, he'll enter the portal, and he already has high major basketball teams interested in taking him, which that doesn't really align with the whole NCAA violations holding him out sort of thing, unless there's just some other shoe that's not dropped yet. Because, again, nobody has the full picture here except for a few people in Anderson Hall and a few people in Veneer and a few people in the Ice Family Basketball Center. Everyone on Twitter, nobody knows everything that's happened. And I'm not going to pretend to know everything that's happened. But what I can draw, or at least what I can infer and what I can put together from everything I've seen, is that nothing adds up on either side of this. Clearly something happened that was bad enough to lead to this whole thing beginning in the first place. There's been a lot of talk about Linton being the only person in the administration that was preventing Tomlin. That may or may not be true. I'm not 100% sure if I buy that completely, because that just seems super unlikely. And also we need to consider the sources of the information for what we're hearing as well. Like everything coming out at the same time through the sports outlets. I think there's an obvious slant to that information. But on the flip side, what could possibly have been so bad that now he's in the portal and a ton of other high majors are going after him? That's one of the things that really is not adding up to me at all.
Yeah, the thing that that really makes me think about it is not only is the violation apparently not enough to dissuade other high major transfers, it wasn't bad enough for a very strong man of faith in Jerome Tang to try and turn him away, and it wasn't enough to dissuade Gene Taylor from trying to get him back on the team either. And I've had very limited personal experience with Jerome Tang, but he strikes me as someone who is very genuine. I think he truly believes the values that he espouses, and if it truly were that bad, to where, like, to the degree of it's an NCAA level violation that he should not be left back on the team for, I feel like Tang would be the first person to say, he won't be on the team anymore. But he didn't say that. He said, we are working with Naquan. We are trying to love him as best we can as still a part of the team, even though he can't be with the team. And to me, that is the most confusing part of the entire scenario. That what he did was apparently bad enough in the eyes of some being generous, some administrators being very generous. But it wasn't bad enough for the NCAA to say, no, you can't play anymore. That, to me, is going to be the most confusing thing about this entire scenario. I also want to give credence to Jerome Tang, because I think he was the only person, was and is the only person who can diffuse this entire situation. And he did earlier today on the day of recording by breaking up the protests about bringing Naquan back and then sending out a mini hang with Tang saying that the number one thing that we need to focus on is loving each other as a university and sending love to Naquan Tomlin. He was the only person that could stop this fire from burning. And I think given time, it will. But it's still, there's just so much about it that doesn't make any sense to me. And I think that's the worst part, is that there's very little that could be said up to this point without knowing the entire story that would make all of the dots connect. There's nothing that anyone has said on Twitter that has connected dots A to B to C to D all the way to Z. You always get lost somewhere from in the range of D to I. Yeah. Something always gets destroyed in that line.
Yeah, I think that's part of what has resulted in so much frustration from the fan base on this whole thing is that at the end of the day, we have no idea what happened. And I think everybody really is wanting transparency, but we're not going to get that. I think we need to accept that we're never going to know probably what happened unless Naquan decides to just let slip everything, I guess. But I don't expect that either. Because because I mean, on one hand, there's always going to be frustration when you have a great player that isn't playing, but on the other hand, it's even more frustrating when it seems like there's a lot of people that want him to play, but a few that don't want him to play. And this whole legal process that has seemingly played out, it's always more complicated than it looks on the surface. At least I think so. I say that not having any inside information, just saying it's always more complicated than it seems. It just leads to frustration on the fan base's part because nobody knows why, and we all always want to know why this is happening, why X is happening, how come Y isn't happening, and this is gonna probably forever be something that we just kind of wonder about, and maybe some random day we'll finally learn. But at least for now, it's just going to be a huge mystery until, I don't know, some Tubbies...
in perpetuity. It maybe, unless they release the security cam footage.
That's what I was about to say, unless some Tubbies worker...
Whistleblower,
yeah. If somebody just comes out and leaks the Watergate tapes or something, but... I mean, we're probably never going to know. And because I mean, the uncomfortable truth is that the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Mm-hmm. And the reason that's uncomfortable is because we would have to assign blame to somebody that we really want to support. And I don't say that to,
fence it.
Yeah. But it's just, that's almost always the truth in situations like this, especially ones shrouded in mystery. But I'm not going to speculate on, what exactly happened, because like I said earlier, I've heard like 30 versions of the story, and they all have common themes, but they're all wildly different.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to sit here and talk about any of them because I genuinely don't know, and I don't think I ever will know. And all I know for now is that the situation is hopefully not going to fester, because it seems that the staff is ready to move on. I think the team's ready to move on. The K-State administration definitely wants to move on. I don't know if Twitter is going to move on, but I think it's probably for the best if everybody starts to move on now, because, I mean, I don't really want to. I don't know. I don't really think it's fair, but this is probably the best resolution that we're going to get, at least for now, which is really disappointing to say, but I think that's just how it's going to be.
Yeah. And I guess we'll slowly transition into this topic. You mentioned it earlier that this is a failure at multiple levels of administration. I try not to be alarmist, you know me. I try to be pretty calm, at least the day after. If we recorded this yesterday, you and I had a different intro. Well, I had a different intro planned for yesterday, but you know that I tried to remain calm and reasonable, but was failing at it. But the one take that I don't think has changed from yesterday, from when you and I discussed this, from the time that I got out of my property final and witnessed the Hindenburg disaster happening in Manhattan, I'm not sure that President Linton is going to... I don't mean this in the life sense. I don't think he survives this as the university president. I think someone politely tells him that he should move on.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see what happens with that, because I know that there's a change.org petition going around, which that won't do anything.
It's not going to do a damn thing.
It'd be funny if it did, but
it'd be hilarious.
But I mean, I've no idea what to expect on that front. It's entirely possible that he will be gently nudged to take an opportunity that comes up in the near future, but it's so interesting that we ended up with this place with Richard Linton as well, because I think really by all accounts, he was doing a fairly good job as K-State's president up until this point. We'd seen a very slight enrollment increase, which finally put the brakes on a long enrollment slide. And he had announced tons of new initiatives. This just kind of came out of nowhere, I think. And maybe it will end up being that he ends up moving on. But I'm not really sure what to expect on that end. I think based off what we've heard, there's plenty of people that matter that are upset enough to maybe something happens, but it's tough to say, really, because there's a lot of moving parts there, because it's just a really weird situation all around with President Linton, but I don't know what to expect. I do know a lot of people online seem to be saying that, Tang's leaving like tomorrow. I don't think that's set in stone. I think people are being a little reactionary about that, even if it is probably more likely than it was before. That's because I think the chances before were like 0.00001%, and now it's like 5%, which is a significant increase.
Yeah, it's an exponential growth.
But it's still like it's close enough to be a margin of error still in statistics. So it's I'm not ringing alarm bells on that quite yet. But I do worry if he were to leave how this whole situation would play into hiring a new coach. That's the real worry for me, is not just the potential losing Tang, which I'm not ready to ring alarm bells on, but what that would say for our next coaching search, or our next athletic director search, or our next football search, because a lot of things can happen. And I mean, we also need to consider that Kleiman, his contract buyout is tied to Linton as well. If Linton leaves, his buyout goes down to $0, I think.
Yep.
And I think Tang has a similar stipulation in his, which is now very ironic, I guess. But
yeah, we're stuck in the sinking ship together.
Yeah, so it's all around just a really, really weird situation. It's a black eye on the university, and it's really unfortunate that this all unfolded the way that it did. It's just so disappointing and depressing to just see people at every level of administration really kind of mess this up. Because I don't know. K-State deserves better than this.
Yeah.
So I don't know what else to say, really.
Yeah, I think we'll leave it before we get. We'll give ourselves 5 minutes to vent about the Colin Klein thing before the actual weekly recap episode, where we're going to talk about it more reasonably. But I think the best way to leave it off is you and I went to eat earlier today, and you introduced a very interesting thought experiment. And I think that thought experiment is the best way to leave off with this particular topic before we move on to crying about Colin Klein.
The thing I was considering was how would K-State fans look at this exact same situation with the exact same facts that we have available if everything was exactly the same except this was happening at KU. And I think that we would view this a lot differently than we're viewing it right now. I think that on one hand, I think that we would think it's weird that I guess they have a chancellor because they're fancier than we are, but the chancellor, I think we think it's weird that they were involved in the whole situation, but I don't think we'd be as overboard on it. I think that from the basketball side of it, I think we'd be probably feeling differently. Especially given KU's history.
Yeah, their scattered history.
I think that we would look at this a little differently. I think that we might see it as more justified. I think. I'm trying to think about the best way to word this because there's not as much precedent for this type of stuff for K-State, really. So I'm not really sure what to think, but I was trying to like take this issue and look at it through different lenses and try and say, okay, well, what if it was this and what if it was that? And with the whole putting it in a different framing device like that, I think I'm just trying to gain perspective on the issue and see that at the end of the day, the most valuable thing that it does is show that we will move on regardless. Like, KU's had this happen plenty of times where they dismiss a guy who seemed like they're going to be high impact, or they are high impact. Granted, sometimes they don't dismiss him. I think we were more punitive than KU normally is, at least for significant contributors. But they always manage to find a way, and they'll be fine. And I think we'll manage to find a way and be fine as well.
I think just leaving it on that thought experiment is probably the best way to think of it. All right, now it's time to melt down about Colin Klein. This news broke on the foundation via DUI the night before it happened. That was a nightmare scenario. To the day before your My Property final, it was terrible. Waking up, seeing that the hire had been made and that Colin Klein will be going to Texas A&M. The worst part about it has been survived. We're not losing Avery Johnson, at least in the immediate future, which, good. Jury's still out on a few recruits from next year, or I guess this coming recruiting class. But, it sucks losing a K-State legend that led one of the best offenses in the Big 12. And we'll talk more about the announced person who is publicly known, and then the super secret coordinator that apparently is a hot candidate for it. But in the 3 minutes remaining in the vent episode before you and I cut it off, just what was your reaction to that information?
I mean, I didn't think it was possible for K-State to receive a bigger gut punch than that. And it took less than 12 hours for that to be proven wrong. But Colin Klein leaving after he turns down Notre Dame last season, after he may or may not have turned down Penn State this offseason, for him to leave for A&M of all schools, I thought was really strange. I felt like that was the worst fit of the three that offered him. I don't think it was even the most money. I think Notre Dame offered him more. And it's just a really weird situation. It's heartbreaking because Colin Klein is one of the all-time K-State greats. It's not closing the door on him coming back to be the head coach, I think, which with some time to reflect has made me feel a little better. But the cards are stacked against us right now for that to happen, because historically, once a prodigal son leaves K-State, they don't come back. Granted, Klein did leave before, but it was to Northern Iowa. I think we can feel pretty comfortable about him coming back in that situation. So I'm really disappointed that Colin Klein is leaving for Texas A&M. They got a great coordinator. They finally have seemingly a good coaching staff. We'll see if they actually do anything with it. But it hurts. It really, really hurts.
Yeah, it hurts a lot. And like I said, the major disaster has been avoided. Avery Johnson will still be here. But, damn, dude, it just sucks a lot. In the moment, I don't even think in the moment now. It was the worst day in K-State athletics since we've started the show. You told me it was the worst day since 1998. I wasn't even an egg yet, so I wouldn't know. But it sucks. And yesterday, December 6th, is probably the worst day of the Millenia, at least so far, for K-State athletics. But the sun came up the next day.
Yeah, I mean, the Golden Child is still here. Kleiman is still here. Tang is still here. The Earth is still rotating.
Mini Cats are still good.
Yeah. Mini Cats are still goated. I can't wait to talk about them and the fun episode. But, you know, we made it through one of the worst days that I can imagine for K-State athletics.
Yeah. I'm not even going to bother doing the full outro. Go listen to the happy episode now. Thank you all so much for listening. Stay safe, Alleycats.